there were a number of hands with questions, and those hands should go back up, and we should take the questions. Yes, please, Catherine.
I was wondering if the fourth objection about the overall beauty of a person is a result of and not the basis for love. When I read through there, I kind of wondered if that's what we talk about in the world of psychology as the honeymoon stage or the disillusionment that people experience after the first, say, 18 months of a relationship. They passion, they all of a sudden, all these things that they liked about a person they don't like.
Yes.
So it becomes a struggle.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a very interesting passage where he's dealing with the objection that love somehow invests the beloved person with beauty. So you don't find it, and on that basis love, but you first love, and then or maybe you want to love so much that you inflate the person with all kinds of beauty that they don't really have. And Van Hildebrand wants to acknowledge that really happens. You know, there is, you see it already with Don Quixote, who takes this little simple peasant girl and has her inflated into a great noble princess. So the power of the human mind to invest things with value that they don't really have is undeniable. And so the suspicion arises with love. Well, maybe there are different energies here, especially in the relation between man and woman, that just invest the beloved with the beauty. But the beauty is more my doing and isn't there inherent in the beloved person. And Van Hildebrand's response is that happens all the time in the setting of love, but it's not the very essence of love. Love isn't inherently built on this kind of value deception. And so then, and that's an interesting strategy. He says, well, now let's look at the forces which do create value illusions. And so the sensual desire, right, that in the relation between man and woman leads to all kinds of idealizing and investment of a person with a beauty that is more imagined than real. So the sensual desire. But he says sensual desire is not love itself. It's often there in conjunction with love, but it is not itself love. Or I like very much the idea of parental love leading to all kinds of illusions about one's children. A kind of parental pride. Where it's my child, it must be a genius, and so that inflating of one's own children out of a kind of parental pride, that is sometimes found in there mixed up with parental love. And so the good work Van Hildebrand does is to discriminate between these value fantasies that we indulge in, and show how they're connected in different ways with love. But he distinguishes that from the love itself, with its profound reverence toward the beloved person, which really does discover what's really there in the way of the beauty of the beloved. So now we can try to, I think if I am hearing you right, you want me to talk a little more concretely about all of that.
No, I just wanted to know if that connection that I made was right. I think the difference with the parent love is that they love their child, then the illusions come after that, whereas the honeymoon disillusionment stage in marriage comes first, and then love, true love, grows out of that. If they, once the illusion passes, they see the value of somebody beyond the financial things.
And maybe I don't know if we want to think about the honeymoon stage simply in terms of illusion. There's a kind of ardor that is there, and an energy of love, an eagerness to love there. But perhaps it's not always just a matter of a value illusion. It's just that over the long run, you know, these energies flag, and then you've got to go to a deeper level to keep the love alive. But that's a different case from the case, you know, of a kind of wild idealizing of a person and creating a kind of illusion about them. So, yeah, Van Hildebrand's attempt is to somehow throw love into relief as something that is really a value response by distinguishing it from these other things that are closely mixed in with it in human affairs. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else along the line of that question. That's an important issue that Catherine raises. But now, yes, Chase, you had a...
I wanted to bring up the idea of love presupposing, or love as the presupposed condition of apprehending the value.
Yeah.
He brings up Shaler's idea of a loving openness to the beloved as a requisite condition for actually receiving that value in the first place.
Yeah.
And it seems that Van Hildebrand does see a place for an openness necessary to really receive that value. Yeah. But at the same time, he denies that this is love.
Yeah.
But Shaler defines this loving openness in the first place as love itself.
Yeah.
So, in what sense, for Hildebrand, does that openness, or in what sense is there that openness? What kind of openness is that?
Yeah, well, so there's loving openness in Van Hildebrand, and then there's love properly speaking. And the loving openness connects me with and helps me to grasp the beauty of the beloved, and only on that basis can love properly speaking, love as a value response, arise. So there's a kind of dispositional openness or readiness, something the opposite, you know, of a kind of critical, objective assessment of a person. That openness lets you know, the person somehow appear in his or her particular beauty. But he's maybe more insistent on this value response idea than Shaler was. He thinks, I've got to find and experience that beauty before I respond to it in love. So there's a kind of, you know, we could speak of a kind of friendliness towards people, which is quite distinct from a bond of friendship with a certain person. And it's something like that that he is working with here.
But there is room in his philosophy then for this kind of disposition, which is fundamentally distinct from love power.
Right, yes.
There is a requisite.
That's right. There is, that is certainly here in the book. I don't know if it's right there in chapter 1, but that idea of this loving disposition, this approaching a person with a readiness to love, eager to find what's beautiful, that kind of, the opposite, you might say, of all suspicion in your approach to another, which shuts down a lot of doors in your possible relation to the other. Yeah. Good. Yes, Kevin.
Must I see a value in another before I can love them? So maybe I meet someone and they're not displaying their value or their beauty, yet I know I'm supposed to love this person, love a neighbor, maybe love an enemy. Can I have love for them, or do I have to first see value before love can exist?
Yeah. Well, it's a little different with love of neighbor. Now, von Hildebrand has a long discussion of love of neighbor in chapter 11 of the Love Book, which I did not assign for the course. But there, the basis for the value response is a sense of a kind of divine dignity that the person has as an image of God. And, I know that, whether I experience it or not, I know that every human being has that divine dignity. And that's enough for me to approach them with love of neighbor. Now, with the human loves, like the love between man and woman, it's not quite enough just to know that. I've got somehow to experience the beauty of that person for the love to come into being. And now, von Hildebrand has the very beautiful idea that a person often lives in a way that is unworthy of himself or herself, and often lives in a way that obscures this beauty. And he says the eyes of one who really loves can see beyond all of that mess that a person may have made of their life and get a glimpse of. And in that way, love can be life-giving for another, because when you appeal to the best in them by loving them despite everything, then you somehow awaken what's been covered over and obscured. So that, he thinks, is very possible, that you glimpse the beauty, and despite a lot of ugly things there, see, that's the real person, and love on that basis, giving life and helping the person to come to themselves. Yeah?
Can I ask a second question?
Yeah.
All right. Is it okay?
Of course, yeah.
So, in thinking of love as a value response, it almost seems as if love is an individual action, and I wonder how this relates to love as a virtue. So, if love is a value response, I see their value now, but
oh yes, yeah.
A few minutes later, maybe I'm not seeing their value. It's disappeared.
Yeah.
Whereas love as a virtue is
right.
something that's more continuous.
Right. Well, von Hildebrand tries to capture that aspect, not in the first, but in the second chapter, when he calls love a superactual response. So that means my love for a person doesn't spend itself simply in my conscious experience of the love, but it's a permanent stance, a valid stance of love, whether it's consciously experienced or not. That's the superactuality of love. And that's what I think is the virtue, what it makes it like a virtue. So, yeah, love would be on a pretty frail footing if it were just existed when it was experienced. But through its superactuality, I mean, there's a sense in which I can say I really love my wife sitting over here, even when I'm absorbed in some philosophical work and not directly thinking about her. So the love endures superactually, von Hildebrand says, as a real stance of the person. So I think that's the way he would supply that virtue aspect of love. Yeah, now, please. Yeah, Margaret, did you?
I was hoping you might say a bit more about the relation between value response and ethical actions. So
Yeah.
how is it that, so it sounds that, my understanding is that you have the value response and that leads to, right, to
Yeah.
rise
Yeah.
to the appropriate action.
Right.
Why should we care about the value response? Why not just have the appropriate actions
Yeah.
without the value response?
Yeah.
Can I understand?
Yes. Well, but Hildebrand thinks that the moral life is not limited to actions. So he would say that the well-ordered admiration or esteem or veneration, even if it doesn't lead to action, is really a part of a person's moral life, and really forms and reveals moral character. Now, there are actions too. And of course, the actions are not just external pieces of behavior. They have to have an inner soul. And that's the value responding structure of the action. But a significant thing about his ethics is that it's in no way restricted to actions. He thinks that what we do with these inner responses may not be connected with action, can have a lot to do with our moral character, for better or for worse. So promptings of envy, that we acquiesce in, compromise us morally, apart from destructive actions performed. And admiring us, and a capacity to admire all that's admirable, makes a person morally worthier. So that idea of these inner affective responses, building up or tearing down moral character in a person, is a big theme in his ethics. Yeah. Tell me if I've hit your question or not.
I'm not entirely sure why I should think that. So it's
yes.
So I do agree, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't see the argument.
Yeah. Yeah. Well.
I think it's to do with our telos, isn't it?
Yeah.
We are ordered to
Yes.
ultimately.
Yes. Well.
Not just to do everything right, but to satisfy Kierkegaard, perhaps.
Well, there's a love of the good that is lived out in those well-ordered value responses, those well-ordered affective responses. And that love of the good, is just the kind of thing that would form character. Or, mean-spirited, resentful, envious impulses that I acquiesce in and live with, that's an antagonism to the good that understandably weakens moral character, one would think. But there may be, you're looking for something further still.
Is it that the moral life is having the proper experience of reality, and so when you have these appropriate value responses, you're experiencing reality?
There's a certain, you live the truth when you give things their due with your loving and venerating and admiring. That puts you in the truth in relation to the good. And that understandably, for him, makes you better morally. Yeah, please, Maria.
It would seem almost that the meaningfulness of ethical action would really only come from the value response. It would be very arbitrary. Yeah, if I had no foundation for ethical action, then I would be following the code of law, but then the question would be which one. So in a certain sense, value, we spoke of it as the inner life or the inner soul. That it's that inner also direction. And it makes my action meaningful, that it is precisely in relation to a good or to a specific value. And if I took that relation away, then it could become very emptier. It would lose that. Meaningfulness might be a way of the book. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yes, yeah. That is helpful. Were there other questions from before the break? So I had been asking you to pull out of the first chapter the most challenging objections that von Hildebrand raises to his own value response position. There's one objection you haven't raised yet, and which is really an intriguing one. I'd like to bring it up. It's the objection based on the fact that when you're asked to explain why you love a person, you never can do it to your satisfaction. So you're asked, why do you love this woman? And you mention, well, there's this quality and that quality and charm and kindness. But as you talk, you realize that's not a full reason why I love this person. And so you quickly start to stammer and realize you're not giving any very good account of why you love this person. It's a well-known experience. And the objection is, well, this just shows there's really no value there. If there were a value there, you'd be able to explain it. You'd be able to give it a name and explain why you love this person. But because you stammer and stutter and are dissatisfied with everything you say about why you love the person, it's clear you're reaching into the dark, and there is no value. So love just, on this view, sort of irrationally attaches to this or that person, who knows why, but there's no question of a value basis for it. So let's call this objection the speechlessness of the lover. The lover asked to give an account of his love is typically speechless. Or if he says a lot, he's very dissatisfied with himself and knows he hasn't really answered the question. So that objection occurs in the text, and it leads to a very important clarification of his whole conception of love as a value response. So, is the objection clear? If that's not clear, we'll back up and spend some time on it. Now, how about the response that he gives? How do you read him responding to that objection? He acknowledges the fact of the stammering, the inability to give an adequate account of why you love. But he doesn't think that tells against the value response character of love at all. Yeah, Robert.
Well, I see him as responding in two ways. The first response is he wants to argue there's so many values that we don't even have concepts for each value. But I think he goes deeper and thinks the person is so individual.
Yes.
And this value is so individual that we don't have human. So there's such a radical individuality to the person that there's no way. Our concepts tend to lean toward more universality and generality.
Right.
So we lack the concept because of this radical, what you would call incommunicability, which is very beautiful because it's the person is so unique, so individual. Or as I think it's Maritain, or I forget, reason box. There's no way to come up with a word that describes it.
Okay, that's exactly the answer of von Hildebrand, that this beauty that awakens your love is so individual to this unrepeatable person that the beauty is unutterable or ineffable, because our language works with general terms. So we can describe qualities, general qualities, kindness, charm, imagination. All of those are qualities with a name. But they're all general qualities. And we find them in many individuals. But when you love a person, precisely in these human loves, von Hildebrand says, you've had a vision of this unrepeatable person and the beauty proper to this person. And that's something so individual that it can't be uttered in language that works with general terms. It is, therefore, this beauty seen in the beloved person ineffable. It's real, it's seen, it's felt, it awakens love when felt, but it's unutterable. And the stammering just bears witness to the radical individuality of the beloved person and the beauty of the beloved person. It does not bear witness to the absence of any value at all, as the objection would have it. So you could say that for von Hildebrand, the beloved person has, that there are two levels of value. You can reasonably describe, the beautiful character, the virtues of this person, and you can name them, but that doesn't exhaust the beauty that awakens love. There's something too individual to be named, something existing not in lots of individuals of a certain kind, but existing in this unrepeatable person, and never to be repeated in any other. And so you've got no general term for that. And so our language breaks down, and we stammer and gesture toward it. So that's what I wanted to call a very significant development of the value response idea as applied to love, that it is the person taken in his or her individual, unrepeatable beauty. That's what awakens this response. So that's not the case with admiration. I can admire somebody for their courage, and so I completely name the value that motivates that value response. Nothing is unutterable. But here with love, we get into this realm of the unutterable and the ineffable. And that is a very distinguishing mark of value response as it occurs within love. And an intriguing fact about love. Let's see, Samantha and then Catherine. Yes?
I guess I'm wondering why the individuality is so necessary, because it seems like the mere beauty can't be fully described of the person. So how does the individuality of the person become necessary in that?
Well, think of it like this. Let's suppose you love a person for, you're asked why you love them. And you love them because, let's say, of their kindness. That's a virtue with a name. You love them for their kindness. Now, the problem is, if you meet up with somebody who is kinder still, then your love migrates over. And you love that person more. And you meet up with a still kinder person, and that person now becomes the main object of your love. So if we're just working with qualities, we're never going to love this person. You see, and that's what love as friendship in all of its categories is. It's loving this person, and not just a specimen of some beautiful quality. As soon as we start treating persons as instances or specimens of lovable qualities, we're not loving them as persons. We're loving the qualities. And, you'll feel very unloved if you have the sense, I see this great noble quality you have, but, we'll replace you with somebody else who has it more. Obviously, in the case of real personal love, I don't respond at all to the greater quality of I remain with my love for this person. And that's because this individual, unrepeatable person has a beauty, all his or her own. That's where the individuality comes in. It serves to keep our love anchored in this person, not any other, not any specimen of any beautiful quality. This person. And that's what von Hildebrand is grappling with here and in chapter 3 as well. The extreme thisness, you might say, of this person who is love. Just think of the general qualities as somehow making us instances or specimens of a quality. So that what's really loved is the quality, or a person insofar as they're an instance of it. But then the love doesn't really adhere to the very person, and the person won't feel loved in the least. Yeah, Robert.
Could you say this is where, ironically, Kierkegaard was seeing about human love?
Yeah.
He called it exclusive and preferential, although ironically it's what he didn't like about it.
Yeah.
But he's kind of seeing what von Hildebrand sees here. There is something exclusive,
right,
which for von Hildebrand is very beautiful.
Right,
for
right,
him, which he,
right,
for some reason, seemed to want to reject.
Right,
but
yeah, yeah. He sees the exclusivity there too much in the light of selfishness, and he doesn't see how it can be a response to this person and all the mystery of this personhood. Yeah. Yeah, Kevin. Excuse me. You're up next, Catherine.
Just not only on what you were saying about it, you could find somebody else if you found the qualities more in them, but also if you state the qualities about a person, that I love you because you are this. Well, we aren't always a certain quality, and we change.
Right.
So that person, like, if I was told that, I'd be like, well, what about those days that I don't present?
Right.
You love me those days.
Right.
But when I read this, besides a personal it resonating, I was reminded of something I read in Fulton J. Sheen says this, and he differentiates between women and men, but he makes a comment, for a woman, love is its own reason. I love you because I love you. And he talks about how for women, they can't be, now he says different for men, but he kind of picks up on that same mentality.
Right. But the expression, I love you because I love you, mustn't be read as if the love were just whimsical and arbitrary. It has a basis that can't be uttered in concepts. And yeah, often I see among the undergraduate students here, they dream of marriage, and they start making lists of all the qualities that the future spouse is supposed to have. And I tell them, this is not the right way to go about it, because you're not going to love a bundle of lovable qualities, but a person. And you've got to love the love that stays fast when the qualities come and go.
But on that, would that be qualities of a superficial nature? I mean, I think it's legitimate to make a list of, say, share a faith, or
yes,
or
right,
have
right,
be financially responsible.
Yes, right,
that are a bit more
right. Stay out of jail. Yeah, they're of course, there are reasonable conditions like that. But sometimes the list of qualities tends to, be meant as a complete description of the spouse, and that's where they are proceeding a little too rationalistically in this matter, von Hildebrand would say. Now, there was a question. Yes, Kevin, and then we'll come back to Dr. Federica. Yes?
I'm going to withdraw my question.
You are, just because he was a former teacher of yours?
No. Well, maybe I won't withdraw.
Yeah.
I'm wondering why something similar could happen in terms of individuality, where I'm struck by the individuality of someone, but then somebody else comes along and I'm struck even more by their individuality.
Yeah.
So couldn't something similar happen in relation to someone's unique individuality, just as it can with their happiness?
Right. But you see, when you say more, you're implying some kind of common denominator which is possessed more by one. Well, the fact is that persons, as incommunicable, unrepeatable, they precisely lack this common element that lets you rank one over the other and say one more and one less. So there's something incomparable and incommensurable about a person really understood as a person. As soon as you say, this person's great, but what's great there is in fact greater still over here, then it's after all some common trait instantiated more here, less there. And we're back into general qualities and reducing persons to instances of those qualities. Yeah. Let's see now. Yeah, Gwyneth, you.
I don't know. I guess my question was: are there any instances where Hildebrand would say that we all have like an obligation to migrate from like a love of neighbor to a more human love? Let's say in a society with like arranged marriages.
Yeah.
You know, at first that other person is just
right.
Perhaps you're
yeah.
with a love of neighbor.
Yeah.
Is there a way to say, well, I will love this person and their charm will be revealed?
Yeah.
It seems like
yeah.
before the marriage, but afterwards.
Yeah. Well, he takes a pretty dim view of arranged marriages in the marriage book.
But even marriages where perhaps there wasn't the best intentions.
Yeah.
beforehand,
Right. Well, that would be the way he'd apply his philosophy of love. If the marriage was entered into without the right basis, without any real value-responding love, one can at least try to build it up and sort of bring the marriage maybe closer to what love really is. That would surely be his counsel in that kind of situation. Yes, Dr. Federico.
My question is based on something you just sparked in the course of the dialogue, and it is the following. If there is a specific incommensurable value of the person that is the basis for spousal love, since this is the focus of the book, that is not shared by anybody. That's, I think, clearly but the difficulty is the question, the following question: is that value perceptible by any other than the one for whom, let's say, it's destined for spousal love?
Yeah.
Because if it isn't, then it's possible that 4 or 5 guys fall spousally to the same woman.
Right.
And conversely, there's another problem. Why is it theoretically difficult to explain in ground marriage if we don't have a distinct grasp for the unique value that constitutes spousal love as opposed to friendship?
Yeah.
And if somebody like Kierkegaard doesn't see that, then all of a sudden, not only is he wrong, but all of a sudden we understand the mechanism of his error. Because there's an incommensurable value that is not communicable in the sense of perceivable for everybody.
Yes, right.
So the further mystery opens up is perhaps what we used to call being destined, that this is the destined one. Who destined her for me?
Yes, right.
Well, the question is open, and very often there's a discovery of something that one doesn't have the experience of before one falls in love spousally.
Yeah.
So it seems to be also implicitly a mystery about that unique, specific value which alone engenders spousal love, as opposed to friendships, which is much more open to everybody.
Yes, right.
Is this something that's stretching it, or?
That's.
Was theoretically the question now is, what is the theory of marriage that we present to those who want answers to their questions?
It seems that that vision of a person that awakens spousal love can unfortunately be had by more than one, and that. So you're suggesting?
How do we know that? I mean, is there any evidence? I see the contrary consistency with what Hildebrand's claim of this unique and beautiful value.
Yes, right.
It seems to me that it's not, or it wouldn't be. I mean, other aspects of its personality that is also could be seen by friends.
Well, it's a good question. Let me just let it stand now as a question. Namely, in the love between man and woman, is there a vision of the beauty of the other had only by the person who loves the other spousally? Or can that vision be shared by several? That's a very a very thoughtful question. Yeah, Maria?
I'm actually wondering, though, and we want to let it stand, but I've always been intrigued by that passage in Scripture where Christ says that in heaven we will not be married to a particular person. And I've always wondered whether that is sort of the transcendence of the human limitation to, humanly there is a limitation to love someone so deeply, to love more than one person. And I mean, we can make perhaps a philosophical argument for monogamy, that somehow once we transcend that, does that mean? I don't know. I mean, I've always been very intrigued that perhaps that means that we have access to that particular beauty of the individual so much more, but then we would all be sucked up.
Why wait for heaven?
Well, all right. That's a very thoughtful question, too, about that since you bring in deep theological issues of the next life, I'm going to let that one stand for right now also. And let me catch, yes, over here, and yeah.
I think also this objection that because we cannot indicate the reasons that there aren't, that it is not a value response, even experientially it can be rejected in terms of the beloved asking the lover, what is it about me that you love?
Yeah.
He stutters and he says, well, there must not be any value.
Yeah.
Because I can't name it.
Yeah.
And she would feel very unloved.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Right. Typically, the lovers say, well, because you are you, and that is a way of gesturing toward this mystery of the person.
But if he said no wrong, say she's
Yeah, no, that's... she would then rightly send him back to the reading of this passage in von Hildebrand. Yes, please.
Could you say with this objection that over time the lover is able to utter what is completely unutterable, at least part of it, or
Yeah.
certain
Yeah.
values?
Well, but Hildebrand thinks that with this beauty of the beloved person, there are aspects that are utterable. There are qualities that flow into it that nourish, as he says. He uses in German the term Gesamtschönheit, the overall beauty. And so there are beautiful qualities that nourish that and feed into that overall beauty. And those qualities can be named. But he thinks that the overall beauty, which is somehow the signature of this person, remains ineffable by just the limitations of our language, which works with general terms and general concepts and predicates things that can be said of many. So here we've got something that can only be said of this one being, and we're sort of out of resources in terms of the language needed to utter that. So I think along those lines he might answer that question. And then there was one other. Yeah, Jesse.
I guess there are a lot of things in my mind that are kind of coming up as criticisms of this, but one of them is like, it seems to be that I think von Hildebrand is correct, but he describes like one aspect of the experience of love, and the reality could be like if you, for example, have someone, let's say you have a child who's handicapped, and sometimes you see the person there, sometimes you don't. Often you see like you're initially repulsed or something like that. And there has to be an act of the will there saying, I will love for this person. Or take, for example, from St. Augustine's Confessions, his parents' relationship, right? His father was abusive toward his mother, and he had affairs and this and that. But his mother willed his good, his salvation. So she bared with it patiently, and in the end, it sort of worked out. Whereas, and even like my last example is like prayer. Like sometimes you see Christ, right? But you could be like mother. You could be in a situation where you experience dryness the whole experience, but you say, "I will to continue to be a priest. I will to continue to be this in this situation, it seems like there's almost like, and I'm not accusing of this, but like almost like an idolization of the person. I think that's something John Paul II as well, and they get from Kant to a certain degree. It's sort of like the person isn't in it itself, which is true to a certain degree, but like out of charity, and then again, charity is not necessarily an effective response always to God. It's like, I will, this person's good, or I will take care of this kid, or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I hear you raising the question of the relation between the will and the heart in love, and the fact that sometimes the will has to carry the love relation in dark times, and that you can't always live out of the abundance of a full heart. And my excuse for not saying anything more right now is that Maria Walter has that topic tomorrow morning, and then Jules Van Schaik will come in with Wojtyła's somewhat different view of the will and the heart in love. So I think that will give you the fullest possible answer to what you're raising, if I'm hearing you right. Yes, please.
Okay, I actually had a response to Professor's dilemma earlier, and it's going to sound bizarre, and I'm trying to come up on how to explain it. But I just took an Aristotle course, and we talked about his metaphysics, and the whole thing about how that's how I relate how the virtues are specific. In the instance of a single person, more like if you were talking about abstraction and universals and forms, and how like you can recognize a virtue. For instance, like in Maria, I think.
Yeah.
Maria,
Oh yeah.
Maria, okay.
Maria has a lot of virtues.
Like you were
Yes.
saying, like kindness. Okay, so Maria's kind. But in relation, in that it's particularly in Maria, and like the kindness is particularly in her, you can't separate. You can say like, oh, kindness here, and then Gerard is also kind, but because they're different persons, you can't. It's a particular kind of kindness that you can't find anywhere else.
Right.
Because of who she is as a person.
Right. Now that's a good point. That when you look at something like kindness, which is a general name, and we speak of many cases of kindness, but if you look more closely, you see that the person with their unrepeatable identity puts their own stamp on the kindness. And that's why the kindness is often a path to love, because there's not just this abstract property that's shared by many, but it's got the impress of this unique person in his or her way of being kind.
And there are some interpretations of Aristotle, like Acro, and there was another one where they talk about that, but like with colors and other things.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah.
So when Professor was saying about how I think we recognize in a certain person, we recognize a specific virtue, but we also see a glimpse of how it plays particularly in that person, and we kind of fall in love with that.
Yes.
And other people can see a certain glimpse of it.
Right.
But in marriage, you're learning that a lot more thorough, and you're really seeing the particular virtue in that instantiation.
Yes, right.
So maybe that's the journey of marriage, that you're learning about that person and their particular instantiation of virtues. And then in heaven, we'll know how everybody has the virtues, but according to them as a person.
Yes. Yeah. No, I like that idea of the virtue which has a common name being personalized and receiving the imprint of this unique person in the way he or she lives it. That's exactly the two levels of beauty, of the beauty that motivates love for Van Hildebrand. These qualities that play into and then reveal the unutterable person. That's nicely put in your own terms. Yes, Mary Claire.
I guess back to an objection, and he addresses this paradox And I'm not quite sure it's resolved clearly for me. So the paradox is that the paradox of love presupposing value knowledge, while at the same time empowering us to see value more clearly. So in order to perceive, say, the beauty or the courage in someone, you have to first know what beauty and courage are.
Right.
And so to me, that if you don't have that firm basis, you're introducing an element of subjectivity. So you have a distorted view of, say, what courage is. You're going to define someone as courageous who actually is not.
Right.
And you're going to perceive that and have that value response, and it's a sort of false one. So, for instance, just to make this clear in my own mind, I was thinking recently on social media, everybody was using hashtag Stand With Wendy, and she was this paragon, Wendy Davis, of courage. But it strikes me as not courage to be supporting the murder of innocents. And so if they had a correct view of what courage was to start with, they wouldn't be having that value response to someone who, to me, is not courageous at all.
Right.
So how do we even debate that? Because they're having this value response to her, and I'm having the exact opposite.
Yes, right.
So we have to have some sort of objective standard.
Yes, right.
Say what courage is, what beauty is, goodness, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, the norm, I think, just to give a very superficial or brief answer to a big question of how we discriminate, between value mistakes and true value perceptions. But the norm for Van Hildebrand would be, what motivates the courage? What kind of danger does the courageous person face? For the sake of what goods is the courageous person facing danger? And there he would find the norm for distinguishing, the real thing of courage from pseudo, so-called courage, where in this case, there's no good that Wendy is facing dangers to protect. So the nature of the good protected by and defended by the courageous person would be at least one norm for what's real courage and what not. Now, let's see. There was one other subject I had wanted to raise. I'm thinking I'm just about that's too big a thing to raise with just a few minutes left. So let me, staying with the issues we've worked on, did you all get the idea of the thematicity of the person? That's a strange expression. And it may have been obscure to you. But there in Chapter 1, there's a good bit of talk about the thematicity of the person who is loved. And I'd like to maybe clarify that. So does anybody want to say in your own words what you understood by that thematicity? It's a thematicity of the beloved person. Yeah, Chase?
I guess in my own words, describing Hildebrand's position, it seems that in all the values that one receives in the beloved is the person that shines through. The value is portraying, conveying the beloved to you.
Right.
And in the value response of love, it's always directed to the beloved,
right.
It's not directed to a specific value in the beloved.
Exactly. I think that's it. It's really just another way of talking about what we've been talking about. That the person is thematic when he or she is fully present as this person and not just degraded to being a carrier or a specimen of some beautiful quality. Because then the person isn't thematic. If you just take the person as an instance or specimen, then what's thematic is the quality instantiated. But in love, the person has to be thematic as this person. So it's his way of protesting against degrading persons to instances of excellences and seeing to it that love really reaches and affirms the very person and not just his or her qualities. That's what I think is behind this talk of the thematicity, the person being thematic, or in other words, fully present in the response of love. All right. Well then, let's see, we could maybe just summarize like this. I've tried to lay out the idea of value response in general, apart from its use in the philosophy of love. And then following Van Hildebrand, I brought it into the philosophy of love and tried to face various objections to love really being, at least first of all, not exclusively, as Maria reminded us, being first of all a value response. And perhaps the most important single clarification that has come out, I think, is this focus on the concrete individuality of the beloved person and the concreteness of the beauty of the beloved person. What's summarized in the talk of the thematicity of the person in love. That, like I say, it creates a very special kind of value response, because something like admiration can really just refer to a person under the aspect of one particular virtue. It doesn't have to thematize the person like love does. So that takes us deep into the so-called personalism of von Hildebrand, with this focus on the beloved person as taken in all his or her uniqueness in being loved.